Hello, good afternoon, Free Thinking Ministries people. My name is Josh Klein. I am your host per usual. You can see it looks a little bit different here today, and that's because we're simulcasting on Phil Bear's channel. Phil Bear has been a contributor to Free Thinking Ministries. He has his own podcast, so if you're watching this on the Free Thinking Ministries channel, be sure to check out Phil Bear's channel as well. And he has written a lot of articles for us and has appeared on our channel, and so we're kind of collabing in this together here today. We're going to be having an exciting conversation with somebody who's been an atheist and has moved past that or into something new. And so we're going to explore that with him. But to lead the conversation, I want to invite my good friend Phil Bear onto the stage as well. And as he comes onto the stage, remember that you can like this video, share it with your friends. We want to see people who move from denying God's existence to perhaps embracing it, and we want people to see that. So please like and share this video and subscribe to the channel, Free Thinking Ministries. If you have not subscribed already, click that notification bell to not miss an episode, and do the same thing on Phil Bear's channel as well. Phil, how are you today?
I'm doing great, and I want to make sure my audio is coming through. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can hear you, and that's all
Great.
that matters.
That's right. It's all that matters. Yeah. No, I appreciate you doing this because I am extremely excited about this development. I have been an attendee. I don't know if I can call myself a member or not, but I've been an attendee of a book club called the Atheist and Christian Book Club for several years now. And I've gotten to know James Walker, who is the president and founder of Watchman Fellowship. And then his co-founder for the book club was Bill Kluck. And Bill Kluck represented the atheist perspective. So we read books that are written by either a Christian or an atheist, and that alternates every month. And then we discuss those books respectfully, and we do all this in an atmosphere of friendship, and it's a really productive and healthy and beneficial conversation that we have every month. And I am honored to be a part of it. So, but recently, Bill Kluck, who was the atheist co-founder, had what he described as a crisis of faith in atheism. And so immediately, all the Christians in the book club got on their knees and prayed, and please bring Bill out of atheism. And so recently, he has announced his transition from atheism to theism. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to talk to Bill and interview him and just get his thoughts about why that occurred and what this has been like for him and what the history behind it is. And I appreciate his willingness to share his thoughts on this. And it has tremendous repercussions in the apologetics world, needless to say. But I also want to be very careful that we don't just hold Bill up as some kind of lab rat. We really want to engage with him personally, and we want to connect with him on all levels and communicate and share with him what this experience has been like. And so let me bring Bill and James onto the screen. So hello, Bill and James. Hey. Say hello, and how are you doing?
Hi, guys.
Hello. And so James is on the left and Bill is on the right. And we had our screens reversed earlier, so I want to make sure that everybody knows who's who here. But thanks for being with us. And I really appreciate, Bill, your willingness to come on and just share your heart, because that's really what this whole conversation is about, is just to hear from you. And what this has been like for you, and what this journey has really been all about. And so, but real quickly, before we do that, what I want to do is I just want to ask James to introduce himself also, and then give us a little bit of background on Watchman Fellowship real quickly, just a little commercial for Watchman Fellowship and the Atheist and Christian Book Club. And then I want to turn it over to Bill, and I want to begin to interview Bill and get some insights as to how this journey has progressed. So take it away, James.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Well, as far as Bill and I'm concerned, I'm the Christian side of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. So it's I've had an interest in atheism for quite a while. I am president of Watchman Fellowship, an apologetics Christian evangelical organization focusing primarily on interfaith evangelism. How do you talk to and reach out to people of other religions, other faiths, worldviews?
They seem to have locked up.
Maybe we got. There we go.
The beginning of the Watchman Fellowship, I was one of the first, at that time, Mormon that the founder helped come out from Mormonism to Christianity. And so Watchman helped me when I was a Mormon make that transition. And then I wanted to be part of Watchman and later joined the staff and then eventually became president of it. And so now we're trying to help people make that transition, whether you're a Mormon or a Muslim or whatever faith you're involved in. Our website is watchman.org. And the book club was a ministry that was started out maybe about over 6 years ago now, going on seventh year now. And it's one of various outreaches that we have. What makes the club a little unique is it's something that our ministry did, but we don't have like ownership of it or anything. So we share. It's not my book club. It is atheists and Christians. And so we work together. Bill would help pick out what atheist books we were going to do next. And we try to share that ownership in that.
Great.
As you well know, you've been there, what, 3 years now? Has it been about 3 years?
I think 3 or 4. I think it was 2021 that I first started attending.
And you were one of our authors that we actually had a discussion using your book. So if you were not a full member, you certainly are at that point a full member of the book club. So I would say the fastest way to become a member is, of course, make a donation. But without making a donation, if you show up and participate, you're a member of the book club.
Great. Well, consider that my donation so far. Yeah, but I appreciate you having on, and I have always been intrigued by Bill's contribution to this conversation, and I could tell immediately that Bill is well read on a whole litany of these issues and of these considerations, and so Bill does not come from this or come to the table in an intellectual vacuum. He comes to the table that is filled with unbelievable insights, and so that's what I've appreciated about Bill, and so that makes this transition even more significant for me. But I do want to go ahead and turn it over to Bill, and Bill, I just want to ask you if you could just kind of share with us what your journey has been, because I think you were a former Christian you were a Christian at one point. Is that true?
Yeah, for 40 years, I was a Christian at Colonial Baptist Church. One of the guys in our Sunday school class said, "Hey, Bart Ehrman's going to be at the Barnes & Noble." So I went, "Well, who's Bart Ehrman?" So I went there, and within an hour, I realized I didn't know anything about Jesus scholarship. And, that led me to questions and so forth. Before that, I was into the old earth, young earth controversy. So I learned a lot of science and a lot of apologetics from that point of view. So I come near to Dallas about 15 years ago. I arrived at Dallas, and all they wanted to do was talk about Calvinism. So I went, okay, so all this time with young earth, old earth, and all this is, you guys aren't interested. Okay, so I've learned more than I ever wanted to know about Calvinism. So anyway, but here's the thing. In this subject, apologetics, you really should know Hebrew, Greek, paleontology, chemistry, physics, biology. The list just goes on. Astronomy, because it all impacts, this question: does God exist? So obviously, you can't be an expert or not have all the knowledge of all these fields, you can only get glimpses of them. But I just felt that there was enough evidence to push me over, and especially from the physics point of view, the amazing quantum world we live in, where, you know, it's basically electrons and quarks make up everything. That's the quanta, the lowest levels we can get. So just, and it's been fascinating, you know, thanks to James, you know, starting this book club with me. That's been the big, reason I came over.
Yeah. And so what happened was that originally you were a Christian. You were a Christian for 40 years. You met Bart Ehrman, and did that plant seeds of doubt in your Christianity? And then did you abandon Christianity as a result of your encounter with Bart Ehrman, or was there more to it than that?
Bart Ehrman won't give you the time of day unless you pay him a couple $1,000s. I met him when he was speaking, debating Dan Wallace. And I said, Bart, we're from the same area. He's in Chapel Hill. I was just down the road. And I said, did you get this picture of the old well? I did a print of the old well at University of Chapel Hill.
Like a gift for him?
Yeah. I just left it in his thing. And he goes, yeah, I got it. Are you buying a book or what? Just get it, just blew me off. It's like, remember in Malcolm X, where he finally meets the guy that's the founder of the Nation of Islam, and he's just like, oh, and he's just in awe. So yeah, I'd known about him for a couple of years, read all his books, and
I told Bill when I heard that story, I said, well, you do know that Bart Ehrman loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life.
So, yeah, but it's hard to pinpoint a certain thing, that led me away from Christianity. I guess it was just, the old earth, young earth thing. And, it wasn't so much the textual criticism, although I did ask Bart, do any of these things impact the doctrines? And he said, yeah, I can make a list as long as my arm. So some of these, errors or so forth, variants, do impact the doctrines, but that wasn't the big thing. So,
well, I had asked Bart Ehrman during that conversation. I don't want to go down a bunny hole, but I had asked him during the conversation that we had on the Atheist and Christian Book Club if the flaws in the textual evidence were the reason why he abandoned his faith. And I fully expected him to say yes. But actually, he said no.
Right.
He said that's not what did it. Yeah, problem of evil was what he said. I can't believe in a God who would allow children to suffer. And so that was quite a revelation to me. And I've written extensively about this in my book, Machines Don't Laugh. And this is one of the most common reasons why people abandon their faith or abandon their belief in a good God. And so what was it similar for you? Because it doesn't sound like that was
the problem of evil. When James and I would do our debates in churches and seminaries, what we would say is, what's the biggest problem for me as an atheist? And I would say fine tuning is the hurdle I just can't seem to, and of course now it's all over. And his was the problem of evil. And I just looked at Psalm 73 where David goes, oh, you see the rich getting away, having a great life, and I have all these problems and so forth. But he goes into the house of God, and it's revealed to him that surely their paths are on slippery ground. But when you have an eternal perspective, these things just are very short-lived. And if you're in heaven for 1 billion years, then I don't even remember what all the suffering I went through in life. So that was one thing that kind of helped solve the problem of evil, or make it less of a problem.
Yeah. So what was the main thing that got you into atheism in the first place? If it wasn't the problem of evil, it wasn't the textual variants?
No, not at all. No. It was just problems in the New Testament, problems with the young earth, old earth. Both of them have their good points, but I think the hermeneutics, the reading of the text, points to a young earth. I think they meant evening, morning, 1 days, 2 days, and so forth. They actually believe that it was created in 6 days. And I think the older people just want to cram millions of years into it to make science fit scripture. So, it's hard to say.
Was it historical Jesus studies? Was that the main category then?
That was one of them. But I don't think I really thought it through, obviously, because now I'm a theist. It sounds weird, Phil, to say this. It really does that, I'm still trying to get used to it. So.
Well, I don't think anybody anywhere, anytime could accuse you of not thinking through things. So maybe that was maybe something that you felt you were misguided in the past, but I don't see that kind of pattern with you now. So, but it's great to just to face that. You're giving us embarrassing details that make you more authentic, as far as I'm concerned, and so
we're emotional. We're emotional people, Phil, and I'm an emotional person. I have my biases, obviously. I'm brought up into a Christian nation, and and maybe it's like I read a Christopher Hitchens book, or I was brought in with his charisma. The God hypothesis, I read that with Richard Dawkins. That really didn't have much of an impact. It's just, it's hard to believe. And by the way, we really appreciate your commentary, Phil, especially last month. I just was listening to you and our guest and thought, well, I could listen to this all night, so you really have some very insightful thoughts, and we really appreciate having you as a member.
Well, I appreciate that. C.S. Lewis said that he was the dwarf, that he was standing on the shoulders of the giants, and that's the reason he could see so far. And I've always said that if C.S. Lewis is the dwarf standing on the shoulders of the giants, then I am the gnat on top of the head, on top of the dwarf who's standing on top of the shoulders of the giants. So, I am, but that's, I appreciate just the forum where people can get together and they can have these conversations without hostility, usually, most of the time, without hostility. But my question also is it seems like the fine-tuning argument was was maybe the main catalyst for bringing you out of atheism and back into theism. Was that something that has been rolling around in your head for years, or is that something that just recently just kind of hit you like a ton of bricks?
Well, our first book was The Privileged Planet by Hugh Ross. So obviously, I've listened to him. I actually was a Hugh Ross little follower, although I couldn't get any traction. But even his staff said, I think the plants are coming the third day. That's way too early, because gymnosperms were 390 million years ago, and angiosperms about 175 million. So, but it just, the Luke Barnes, when we read his book, Fortunate Universe, and I read it and didn't read it for about 4 or 5 months, and then I really read it. It's just things like the strong nuclear force, the attraction between protons and neutrons, and these gluons that hold, neutrons are neutral, protons are positive. So these things should repel each other, but it's this very strong force, like 1,800 times more stronger than the electromagnetic force, way more stronger than the gravitational force, that somehow came about. And to think that it came about by chance is, really remarkable. And it just gets worse and worse, like with the Pauli exclusion principle, that these electrons have to inhabit certain orbits, and they have to have the same spin or different spins. And it's just, you have shells, and you have 2 electrons in the K shell, and then the M shell, you have 8 and 8. So it's just so many things. And right from the get-go, you got the cosmological constant, fine-tuned to 10 to the 120th, that if that thing, the expansion of the universe, the dark energy driving, if it's not right within the first few seconds, the universe just collapses into itself. And you have all this mass. We have 1 billion galaxies with 1 billion stars. I mean, just all this vast space and mass, but it has to be balanced with the dark energy driving the expansion of the universe. And it gets to the point where you just give up and say, okay, it looks like a God's behind this thing. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
Bill,
Well,
remember you were there when we did that book. Weren't you with Luke Barnes? Were you
I
in that
don't
book?
think I was.
Okay. Well, the co-author of that book, it was in the whole spirit of the book club. Luke Barnes, he's of course a Christian and a astrophysicist, but his co-author is astrophysicist who's an atheist. And what they said is they both agree with all this data. Now, the conclusion that the atheist co-author comes to is not God, but they agree on the science. They agree on the probabilities, on that expansion rate of the universe, all these kinds of factors. And so I felt like that was in the spirit of the book club, that you already, when you're reading his book, you're reading an atheist and a Christian discussing this issue.
Right. Yeah. Well, Bill, it sounds like a little bit of a faint echo of the heavens declare the glory of God, but I don't know that
You think so?
want to go. Well, but I don't know if you want to go all the way back that far. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, I would. Yeah. Phil, if you start with a mind, then matter falls into place. If you just start with matter, you'll lose your mind. Does that make That's Luke Barnes said that. I just thought that was so he just summed it up.
You stole that.
I still think all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I love that. And I remember what Josh McDowell said in his book, The Evidence That Demands a Verdict. He said, my mind cannot rejoice or my heart cannot rejoice in that which my mind rejects. And that was a big influence on me, but that was back in the 80s. So,
I met Josh McDowell when he was doing one of his talks, and I kept asking questions, and he go, yeah, that's right. Yeah. And he goes, so afterwards I went and said, hey, Josh, you enjoyed your talk and everything. I went, let me ask you a question. Are you old earth or young earth? Kind of like Jesus when the Pharisees asked him, and he goes, I'm 62. So I went, that sounds just so clever.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I'm curious about, and it sounds like this was kind of a gradual thing. That it didn't just happen overnight.
It accelerated when I said I'm in a crisis after reading Luke Barnes' book for about the fifth time, watching his videos, and just looking at the evidence. It was just like all over.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Luke was
that's
kind enough
usually
also after the book club when he Daniel Ray, who's also in our book club, is friends, and that's how he originally got Luke lined up to do the book club as an author. And he's in Australia, which is another distance issue. But he kindly said when he heard the crisis of faith or this existential morass.
Good word. Oh, good word.
It was. He said he would be willing to answer questions, and so we got him on a private Zoom just with Bill to talk through. And for over an hour, Luke from Australia was answering questions and clarifying things that Bill still had questions about. And I appreciate him being willing to do that.
Well, and he said something, which was I talk about stealing. I've stole this a million times. The layman's dilemma is we have a problem because you're talking to someone like Kurt Wise, who's a young earth creationist, who knows far more than you do. He went to Harvard and whatever, but you disagree with him, but you're disagreeing with someone that, just has far. So you're in this layman's dilemma. And that goes for, if you're talking evolution, obviously I'm behind the gun I don't have advanced degrees in biology, genetics, and these impact the question of how did we come about? Was it special creation or a long involved process? And it impacts the question: does there a God exist? So, and another book we read was "Return of the God Hypothesis" by Stephen Meyer. And another thing that I felt compelling was the DNA evidence. He has three things: the Big Bang, the DNA evidence, and the Cambrian explosion. The DNA, it's not the chemical makeup like ink on a page. It's the words on the page. And these nucleotides like adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, it's the order, the arrangement on this base, the double helix, That's what determines the makeup of these proteins and so forth. And it's just, again, it's just the odds of getting one protein. We had him on the club, and I said, what's the odds? And he goes, 10 to the 77th, Bill, of getting one protein. So I went, so there's a chance. No more questions.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
You're telling me that's all I need to know. 10, that's good with me. So,
Jim Carrey pops into the chat.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. Some people have tried to deal with the teleological argument with this idea of multiple universes, or an infinite amount of universes, and so we just luckily get into one. Did you consider that in your journey?
Of course, I considered it for about a second. I mean, we have no evidence, and even if you do have other universes, and there are the cyclical conformity. There are Robert Penrose, whatever, says that could be a solution, that the universe might not have a beginning. We could just be a wormhole or whatever, where the beginning of an ending of another universe. And that's all well and good, but first of all, wouldn't those universes have to be fine-tuned? Wouldn't they have to have some of these, basic building blocks of matter and mass and forces of nature? Would they have to have their own electromagnetic and gravitational and strong and weak nuclear forces? I never felt it was compelling.
And I don't know, I think I shared this on the book club, that if you want to try to invoke the multiverse as an explanation for the cause of this universe, all that does is push the question back. Well, then what was the cause of the multiverse? And so all people are doing is they're kicking the can down the road, but they dress it up in terminology that just sounds so convincing. I remember when we had Lawrence Krauss on the book club. And for those of you who are listening who are not familiar with Lawrence Krauss, he wrote a book called The Universe from Nothing. And he's been criticized, especially in philosophical circles, for actually abandoning the laws of logic in order to explain the beginning of the universe. But remember, we asked him during the book club session, do you have evidence that there are multiple universes, and that are other universes that are kind of a universe factory that could have produced this one? And I remember his response was, no, but I'm working on it. and I kind of found that a little bit bewildering, because if you're a scientist, the way that we do science isn't, I think this is true, and now I'm looking for evidence for it. It's a little bit kind of turns the whole scientific process on its head, I thought. But that's it's interesting, and so I appreciate the fact that you actually were cognizant, you were aware of this teleological argument, and that it didn't really do much for you. Doesn't sound like.
No, I mean, it's like the inflation that the universe doubles in a brief second 80 times to 100,000 light years. How do you wrap your mind around that? I mean, what's driving this thing? You still have to have forces like electromagnetism and the dark energy and so forth to drive this stuff, Right. So, I didn't find, and brute fact, that's another big one. If this is just a brute fact, just accept it. Well, now you're sounding like Christians, We're supposed to just have faith in this. And I'd never we had another guy on who was a philosopher sort of guy. And he goes, oh, that's just the way exponentials work. That's just the way it works. I mean, is that what you got? So I didn't find, and I go to Daniel Ray actually gave a great talk to our atheist book club, where we read it, it's just all atheist. And he mentioned the fine structure constant, which is 1/137th, which is very important in physics, that it was so important. Richard Feynman said every physicist should put this on their wall and worry about it. So I'd ask, are you guys worried? No, it just blew right over them. And if this thing's not right, if it's 4% off, you don't get these outer electrons doing chemistry. You don't get carbon and oxygen, which is kind of big since we're carbon.
And that brute fact answer is really not much different than what atheists have typically and traditionally accused Christians of. Well, God's just a brute fact, so just accept it. And why can't you accept that as a brute fact? And most of the time, an atheist scientist is going to say, why would I accept the brute fact that you have a commitment to by faith? And now what's happening is that we're being asked to do the same thing from the other side of the aisle. And but I wanted to ask Josh if he had any more questions. But before I do that, I want to ask one more, and it's more of a personal question for you, Bill, if you don't mind. And that is that what kind of response have you received from friends and loved ones on this kind of transition in your life?
He has no friends or loved ones.
Yeah, so that's except I have a friend Calvinist, but Calvinists don't have any real friends. So.
Only those that are predestined.
Oh, yeah. That's the highest form of Christianity. You've argued with Calvinists. There's no way you're going to win with them. They're just unreachable. So,
well, actually, what? As a side note, just real quickly, I have to share this. Leighton Flowers was in Colorado last year, and Leighton Flowers is a soteriology 101 guy, and he's a big anti-Calvinist. And he and I got together, and we drove from the place where he was speaking up to my place, and we had ribeyes that evening. And on the way up there, he said, "Phil, I want you to know that that a pastor friend of mine has another pastor friend who read your book, Calvin's Desperation, and as a result of reading your book, he has abandoned Calvinism."
Oh, well, so you can get through, Phil.
So you can't. Apparently, it's possible to get through. Right. I don't know how often that's going to happen.
No true Calvinist.
No true Calvinist. It might be one to the 1077th. Possible.
Yeah, that's probably good. Yeah. But anyway, Kelly, Godless Granny, who I really respect, she's a really insightful lawyer. So I said, "Did you watch the video I did with Farrah Coven on Creation Today?" And she said, "I got to the part where you said they should teach creationism in school. I just had to turn it off." And I'm going, well, let me explain myself. I mean, some schools do have, or I remember seeing something where a guy had a creationist come in and give for one day, just give his opinion. And I've been involved in this young earth, old earth thing seriously for like 20 years before I got into the Calvinism stuff. And I have learned about radiometric dating, geology, stuff like I would have never known. And just recently, all this great physics I've learned only because of apologetics. So why not, have, something where the kids can debate on YouTube? Because as you know, Phil, when you debate something and you have to go and like with James, have an official debate, you really better learn your stuff. It motivates you. So if these kids can have this debate on, did the Ediacaran actually have fossils that are pre-Cambrian that might have influenced the Cambrian? And another one, I didn't know what the Cambrian explosion was. I learned all this stuff from apologetics. So to me, does that make sense? And Dan felt this, or Ken felt the same way, that they felt I went to the dark side. But does that make sense?
Ken's one of our former Christian, now atheist members of our book club, and it was. I'm thinking it was tongue in cheek. He wasn't. I mean, that was a joke, right?
But does that make sense? That have you learned a lot about science and so forth, Phil and Josh?
Oh yeah, I mean, I studied paleontology and other sciences at the University of Colorado, and I remember one morning my professor got up and we were studying spontaneous abiogenesis and how there were supposedly 5 options as to how to explain it, and I remember the professor getting up one morning in class and he said, the first thing he said was, "I just want to get this out of the way right now. We scientists believe in spontaneous abiogenesis by a leap of faith." And I felt like standing up and saying, "Who's being religious here?"
Was that in Boulder?
Yeah.
No, that was in Denver, University of Colorado at Denver. So
okay, you might stand a little better chance on the Denver campus. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe not
Yeah.
Boulder.
But
Yeah, no, I think I'm sorry, Phil.
oh no, go ahead. I just
gonna
wanted
say-
to call somebody a butt before we continue.
I think that is accurate. A lot of those conversations, but that's come from apologetics. But I think that's, even if you don't agree with creationism or evolution, whatever, the idea that neither should be even talked about in the presence of the other. I thought we were supposed to debate ideas and figure out which one makes the best sense, right? And so I would rather have as much out in the open so we can debate them and see what rises to the surface. And when you decide, actually, we don't want to give this a fair hearing because somebody might believe it, that rewind that, and that's the Scopes monkey trial, just the other way around. So, so
maybe
I think
both sides are kind of guilty on that, because it's like you have, Christians, we don't want to talk about that thing, have the discussion. So we'd rather just either make a caricature of it or just say, if you're that foolish, then, we're not even going to talk to you. But then the atheists do have their, it's, they don't like that comparison, but there are parallels with atheism and religions. And so they all have, a creation story. They all have they have a orthodoxy and a heresy, and you better not get on the heretical side of them. It's a lot like a religion.
Yeah. And Bill, did that bother you that there were that this realization that there are certain there are certain articles of faith that exist within atheism? That
I used to preach it. It's like, atheists get all upset. Oh, you're a religion. It's not a religion. Don't, just relax. It's a religion. Who cares? Yes, we do have our holy books like the God Delusion and all of Hitchens' books and so forth. And yeah, we do have reason rallies that, are groups of people meeting together for a common purpose. So yeah, so it's a religion. The thing is it the true religion? And, you have to look at the evidence. Another thing just came to my mind about stuff I've learned is endogenous retroviruses. This is one of the most interesting things because it's like one of the best proofs for evolution, because it seems like us and chimps have a common ancestor going back 6 million years ago, that we have these endogenous retroviruses that have implanted themselves into our genome, and they're on the same places in about 215 places on our genome in chimps, okay? Now, you look at something like Standing for Truth, and Donnie's written a book saying, oh, wait a minute, these ERVs actually suppress tumors. They're an important embryological development. So they have some really important functions.
And that used to be thought of as like junk DNA that had no purpose. And so,
well, that's still debated. They found some junk DNA. It does, have a useful purpose. But here's, like, you've heard me say this a million times. You just have to live with the tension. Because again, it's the layman's dilemma. I'm not a geneticist or biologist. So I'm just going to have to look at both sides. And I've only looked at a certain amount and, try to reach a conclusion. Or maybe I can't reach a conclusion because there's compelling evidence on both sides. Does that make sense?
Well, I have a lot to say about whether there's compelling evidence on both sides, but I'm a little bit biased. I try to be I try to be philosophically objective if I possibly can. But so I guess the answer to the response and reaction you've got from friends and loved ones is basically you don't have any friends and loved ones, and so there hasn't been a response.
Well, I can't wait to go to the atheist book club, because they didn't like me anyway. They all love Dan for some reason. Hey, Dan, let's have lunch. Hey, when and I'm going, does anybody like me? And every time I come to the atheist book club, they say, did you register?
I saw that. I didn't know what they come out. Did you register?
It's like, we do not want, it couldn't be any clearer. You get a feeling whether people like you or not. And, when I went to Metroplex Atheist, which James has been, went for a couple years, they're like, it's just so frustrating. They did a campaign where they said no evidence of God, or it's just a banner. And instead of trying to embrace Christians and say, hey, look, you can ask questions here. We're open. If there are strong points, they just go and let's just alienate Christians even more. You remember the campaign, right?
Oh, there've been several that they've do that. kind of in your face.
It's just the worst marketing ever, and they're never going to go anywhere. When you go to a meeting and you got like it's like all old guys, one woman doing needlepoint, and the weird old guy that just totally kills the vibe of the whole thing.
Well, the other question that I have for you is you're actually, would you say that you are now a deist? Is that pretty much the best representation of your position so far, or at this point?
Well, it's a good question, and boy, I just got to theist a week ago. So, I really haven't thought through the other things. Is God personal?
Okay.
Does he it looks like he transcends the universe and human history. How personal is he? I did ask God if he could reveal himself to me, and he said, hey, when you get 15,000 subscribers like Eric Hovind, I will reveal myself to you, but you just do not have enough subscribers, Bill. So
no, you're not important enough.
Yeah.
Well, and that was the reason that I asked, is because we have had lots of discussions about naturalism and the implications of naturalism. And when someone has that kind of prior commitment to naturalism, usually what that consists of is a denial that there are any supernatural causes, any supernatural events, or any supernatural beings. But if someone becomes a theist and they still have some semblance of naturalism that's residual from their prior worldview, they may be able to retain that, but they have to drop the idea that there's no such thing as a supernatural being. Because if you're convinced by this fine-tuning argument and by all the scientific evidence that there's got to be some kind of supernatural cause, that cause would have to be supernatural if it's the actual origin of natural law. And so if you haven't actually gone through and figured all this stuff out yet, that's okay. We can do a part 2. But I did want to find out where you were on these things and how they fit, and are you still wrestling with them? And if you are, that's okay. We will give you permission to wrestle with these issues.
Well, no, I mean, it's been a big step, so I'm just dealing with this for now. And the transcendence of God, obviously, yeah, certainly, I believe he's transcended human history. Like with the Cambrian explosion, all the major phyla, the echinoderms, the arthropods, the chordates like us. It seems that we don't have any real good ediacaran precursors. So it seems like, God might have, got these things off the ground, these major phyla, which suddenly appear, it seems, in over 10 million years to come about. And as far as special revelation, like, can we talk about the Bible, Phil? I know that's probably something you're not interested in, but.
No, I've never read the Bible, so I'm not going to be able to give you any.
So, we talked about this before, the Syrophoenician woman, it's like you look at the text and you go, okay, this has a real aura verisimilitude. You have Jesus, doesn't even want to be bothered by this woman. And she says, hey, can you heal me? And he goes, look, I'm not going to give the children's pearls and give them to the dogs. And she goes, even the dogs eat the crumbs. And it's like, it has that criteria of embarrassment where it's making Jesus look a little misogynistic, a little xenophobic, but yet he does heal her. So you have to look at the text and go, does this sound believable? Could God, obviously God could, if he could create the universe and all these laws of natures and constants and so forth, he could have, been co-equal of God. Jesus could be God and could have healed people and resurrected from, as we discussed last month, there's evidence that he resurrected. And that's where atheists go wrong. They say, oh, there's no evidence here. Well, of course there's evidence. You have written accounts, whether it's 30, 40 years or whatever, or like in Paul's letters, whether it's 6 months or 2 years, very recently testifying to a belief from the disciples' point of view that there was a risen Savior. So.
Hey guys, I was going to talk to Bill about this some more. We talked a little bit about it at lunch right before the meeting as well. But as he goes through and evaluates, okay, if there is a creator, there has to be too much evidence there. Now, what is this thing? And so trying to answer that question, some of the historical Jesus issues is what first kind of drove him away from Christianity. And I think a lot of it was based on an anti-supernatural bias, kind of like what you were referring to, Phil, because if miracles can't exist, or the wise person would never side on the evidence we would have available for any miracle that could have even happened, then it's going to throw a lot of doubts on much of the New Testament, much of the whole Bible, actually, But and this is what I was going to, and I think that's where you were headed. If there is a creator God, then it makes all those miracles possible.
No, without a doubt.
Not probable, maybe, not proven, maybe, but it makes it possible. So what I was going to say is, if you go back and relook at those historical Jesus issues, Jesus walks on water, the resurrection itself, and if you say, okay, I will acknowledge now it is possible that there's a God, that it could have happened. Now go back and reevaluate. Is it that ridiculous then? Or do the atheist arguments against the resurrection, the probabilities change tremendously if you say there is a God? Well, that makes it at least possible, if not probable.
Well, you look at things like Jesus walking on the water in Mark. Jesus walks on the water. We can't do a videotape. We can't, hey, can you do this one more time so I can get a different angle? We just have to look at historiography. Now, you look at Matthew, and he has Peter also walking on the water. Not necessarily a contradiction, but see, I kind of embrace these minor differences where Christians, contradiction, Another one, one of the most problematic for atheists is the Jerusalem Galilee problem. Did Jesus appear only in Jerusalem for 40 days with the disciples, or did he say, like in Matthew and Mark, go to Galilee? So there's a difference here. So to me, that shows these people aren't colluding. I know Matthew and Luke copied Mark and so forth, but there are things where they do have their special sources, and there's differences, which adds to the credibility. But still, you just got to, are you going to go like with Rudolph Bultmann and just say, oh, well, of course, we've got to just throw out all the miracles. We can believe like the Spice Girls, Mary and Martha. That just seems very believable. So, you just have to evaluate it the best you can.
Yeah. Josh, you have any other questions?
Yeah, well, my next question was just going to be like that. Once you embrace theism or some form of deism, what's kind of next on you can't investigate everything all at once, right? I mean, we wish we could, but we can't. But once you've kind of said, okay, at least deism makes sense, where a supernatural force created everything, and maybe he doesn't have anything to do with it anymore. Maybe he's still intricately involved. But what's next on like the priority list of, all right, where do I go now that I believe this? What's the next thing I want to investigate to inform my view of who this God could be?
Well, I'm kind of floating in the wilderness now, so it's a whole new ballgame. But obviously, here's the thing: we've had some of the best scholars in the world, Dale Allison, on. So now he's a Christian, which he's like, yeah, Jesus, those birth narratives and post-resurrection, they're probably fiction and all that.
Very liberal.
So, do you go and he believes though in the supernatural and so forth, which I do now. So yeah, you just have to, form your own opinion and see where it goes,
Yeah, a friend of our channel, Dr. Mike Lacona, who has been on our channel multiple times, has written extensively on the resurrection and particularly on why there are differences in the Gospels. So I know he and Dale Allison differ a little bit on those things.
Yeah, but he has a lot of respect for Dale Allison. He says he'll never
100%.
be.
Well, our atheist author this month actually has debated Mike on a couple of occasions, I believe, and that came up in the book club. And I've known Mike for quite a while.
Well, and I met Mike at a conference or something, and said, "Hey, Mike, I read your book on the resurrection of Jesus." He goes, "You did?" Like someone actually read that thing.
It's a big book. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Gary Habermas has a 1,000-page book.
Mhm.
You know, how do you find the time to go and really, truly look at the evidence and not just blow it off like my fellow atheists have done, but really, I mean, some of my fellow atheists believe Jesus didn't exist. I mean, and even when I was an atheist, I said, look, guys, there's just multiple attestation. We got different, accounts that are independent, that, the M and L source and the Q source, which is hotly debated, but like even Dale Allison said, Q, there's just a lot of evidence for it. And it seems to be the best explanation for Matthew and Luke's other source. So that's one thing we've studied, and I've studied a lot, is the Christian, the new scholarship, Jesus scholarship. So that's a lot easier than the physics, because the physics have a lot of math. But that's what's so fascinating about this whole thing is you learn so many different things. And why should you stop learning, after college? Why not continue to learn, right?
Well, I do remember, and it's because it's fresh in my mind, Mike Licona just said on Trinity Radio just earlier this week, I could be wrong about these things, because he was under heavy criticism from
John G. West
and Alyssa Childers.
Alyssa Childers, yeah. Elisa Childers, yeah.
Elisa, yeah. And so he's under fire, but his response was, I'm not the only one that has come up with these kinds of theories and these kinds of explanations. So I'm not alone out here, and I'm not a liberal just because I think I take a different view than a lot of traditionalists have, but at the end of the day, he said, yeah, could I be wrong? Sure. And so I appreciate that, because there's a range of options, and none of the options that you might want to take necessarily destroy the whole framework.
All right.
And so that means that we are free to discuss these things, and we're free to have differences about them, and that doesn't threaten us. The only thing that would be a threat would be the idea that there can only be one perspective that could be correct, or that my perspective has to be correct. And what happens is you begin to collapse into kind of a fundamentalist framework if you do that. And so what I like about the New Testament, and what I like about the evidence, is that you don't have to have an absolute concrete explanation or interpretation of all these things in order to still embrace the fundamental truth of what occurred. And a lot of these are secondary details, and they don't necessarily have a lot to do with the fundamental.
I was going to say it could be important, but it's not essential. And so a parallel I see to that is one of our guests, Gary Habermas, Christian apologist on the resurrection. We had him on one of our book clubs, and he was talking about his friend Anthony Flew, who was one of the top atheist philosophers of the 20th century, probably. But late in his career, after long conversations with Gary and several public debates on the topic, Anthony Flew, towards the end of his life, acknowledged that he now believes there is a creator God. That's parallel to, kind of where Bill is.
Well, and a lot of people accused him of dementia. I know I'm kind of losing it here.
I wasn't going to draw that parallel.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
But
wasn't he in his 80s or something like that? When
Gary said, well, he was a deist, but not a Christian. And so Gary was kind of like what we're talking with Bill. Well, what would keep you from taking that extra step to Christianity, or what's the major issue he would see? And for Flew, Gary Habermas said it was kind of the problem of evil in the area of hell and the idea of eternal punishment. And so he just couldn't wrap his mind around the idea of how Jesus or God, how that would work with the love of God. And so what Gary said is, you don't need to worry about that. You can still come to Christ, be a believer, worry about the eternal punishment part later. You don't have to get everything resolved. There are Christians who don't believe in eternal punishment. Now, I'm not one of them, and of course, neither is Gary Habermas. But even if there, I believe the Bible in its original autograph is without error. But you don't have to believe in inerrancy in order to believe in Jesus. So you might want to not let a non-essential issue stand between you and making a decision in what could be an essential issue.
That's good.
Well, and I know that this is probably a shocking revelation, but as a Christian, having been a Christian for 50 years, I still struggle with a few issues, Bill. And I know that's hard to believe, but there's such a thing. There's no such thing as a Christian who doesn't struggle with issues and doesn't struggle with doubts. And in fact, if you meet a Christian that doesn't struggle with anything, then I would seriously be concerned about the state of that Christian's faith, because we're always going to struggle with things. There are problems with all of our beliefs. The fact that we can't work them out doesn't mean they can't be worked out, but we may never solve some of these problems until we get to the other side.
Well, and the church today, Phil, you got this hip, cool church where you can just blend in, do your little sins, and nobody will ever hold you to account. And then you got this Calvinism where they have this smugness and arrogance where, we got all the answers. We know it all, it's just no problem. It's just, it's crazy what's going on in Christianity now, so.
It's interesting with Bill, even when he was a hardcore atheist, he seemed to be very concerned about the doctrinal purity of the church.
Yeah.
And it's just like, why are all these old hip church pastors? And I hate this. And the word faith, it drives me crazy.
Yes.
It's just like, if you're an atheist, don't you want it to be chaotic?
Because I had a friend that taught Sunday school, so I would go every Sunday to his, So.
Yeah, well, and that can be a stumbling block for a lot of atheists, because when they look at the state of the church and when they look at the behavior of Christians and they see how fragmented the church is, and when they see how there's so much lack of intellectual integrity among Christians, it's understandable. I don't think that justifies rejecting Christianity, but it certainly is understandable why some people don't want to have anything to do with it, because of the way, who was it? Bertrand? I don't remember who it was. I'm going to mess this quote up, but somebody said, I like Jesus a lot. It's just his followers that I can't.
Yeah,
stand.
somebody.
And do you remember who it was?
I think that's actually attributed to Buddha, or not Buddha, Gandhi.
He had foreshadowing.
Yeah,
the Dalai Lama, maybe I've heard it attributed that. And that may be one of those quotes that have been attributed to 100 people.
Yeah, it just flies around. Maybe
but I never look at Christians, because one of the people when I was in high school at 17 that led me to Christ, we went to college together. And in college, he would get drunk. He slept around. He just did and he was the core chaplain. And so I've seen the hypocrisy of the church. That has nothing to do with it somewhat, but that doesn't influence my opinion. I just look at the text. You give an example like 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul says, hey, he appeared to 500, some of which are alive today. Some of whom are still alive. Well, that sounds pretty reasonable. He's seen them. That's his evidence. It doesn't seem to have a big agenda here. So, we would love to have the testimony. We'd love to cross-examine them. Where did you see Jesus? What was he wearing? What did he say? But we don't. So you just got to go with what we got and make a decision.
And Bill, have you ever noticed how the matter-of-factness that the New Testament presents the resurrection as, because it's not presented with a lot of fanfare. Exactly. And a lot of rhetorical flourishes. It's presented in a way that's more sober. And when I read that, I don't get the idea that somebody has fabricated this and they're just trying to present it in such a way that they can bazooka it all over the world, and that everybody's going to be so overwhelmingly convinced. They just simply said, hey, we saw this. We are eyewitnesses of this.
Well, the bare bones, unvarnished Gospel of Mark, the women go to the tomb and they say, no, I mean, what's not to believe about that,
Yeah. That makes it believable for me. And
me too. that something
It's
happened.
not the
Sure.
basis for my belief, but it doesn't surprise me any.
Yeah.
That this is presented in a way that
Mhm.
these people are not crazy. They're not zealots. They don't have some kind of psychological disorder where they're trying to go out and convince the world of something that they had a dream about last night. And that's the way a lot of the atheists present it. In fact, I felt like that was kind of the way that Dr. Larry Shapiro presented it. That these are just wild, off the cuff, random accusations, or not accusations, but just random claims that just a whole bunch of illiterate people are out there making. And I just think that doesn't take into consideration the entire historical context and the broad arc of all these historical claims that
Well,
are
just
coming
like in
into,
Galatians 1:18 through 19, Paul goes and meets with Peter and James, and just kind of matter of factly says, "Yeah, I went and met with the pillars and so forth." And and his conflict with Peter, does that not seem like history, reality to you? That
right.
if you're making it up, you'd have them all on the same page. Where Paul says, "Hey, look, I went and confronted him and saying, why are you such a hypocrite? Eating with the Gentiles thing." So as James has said so acutely, that in the Book of Mormon, it's all black and you can say it better than I can.
Oh yeah, when I came out of Mormonism, that's one of the first things as a new Christian that I saw is the Bible seems to be talking about real people. So you have, King David being, a man after God's own heart, but having these terrible other issues and problems in his life. And in the Book of Mormon, all the characters are paper thin. They're either villains or heroes. If they're a hero, they never do anything wrong. If they're a villain, they have no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And it just doesn't read like these are real people.
Yeah. And the question is, were these New Testament writers, are they so nuanced? Are they so clever that they had Peter deny Jesus 3 or 6 or whatever times that just totally sell him out? I mean, are you that brilliant? I don't think so.
Yeah, and what they think of the modern criteria in that regard, so that they could make up those things.
Yeah.
So that modern readers would
they want to have it both ways. The atheists will say, "Oh, these are all Iron Age goat herders and ignorant and stuff like that." And then they had this elaborate plan to describe the resurrection in such a way that no one could figure out what was really going on. And I thought they were goat herders. Which is it?
And that kind of smells like a plot to me. It's like if all this is true, then it would make sense that God would choose people that wouldn't be able to fabricate something this sophisticated. And so whenever we hear the criticism that these are a bunch of goat herders and that they're all illiterate, pre-scientific morons, to me, that just says, well, then that actually strengthens our case, because these kinds of people, they're not the kinds of people that are going to be so genius. They're literary geniuses. That's what C.S. Lewis's argument was. That this would be a whole new literary genre that was invented by absolute genius, and that if that's the case, then
it wasn't. There were no fiction books that were written this way at that time.
And you look at the problems in the Corinthian church, and Paul's going, "Oh boy, you guys got to get your act together. How in the world did Christianity become the world's largest religion with churches like that?" With so many problems.
And every church seemed to.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, good. I would say every church seemed to annoy the local population too. So it was, it wasn't really built to be sustained unless there was something else in there. So you had a comment propped up here.
This is my friend. This is my friend Dale. This is my friend Dale Glover from Real Seekers. He says, "Phil, I'm curious as to what your guest's take is on the evidence of the Shroud of Turin as an atheist versus now a theist."
Apparently, it was dated in the 11th century. It could be, it is a remarkable image, and it could be, the risen Jesus, but it could be someone else. Again, layman's dilemma. There's a mountain of evidence that I haven't looked into.
Yeah. I was going to say you think it's resolved one way or the other, because some study went out, they did a study on the shroud where they went through and carbon dated it or something. But then something else comes out after that to show, there's a reason why this was not a good test or something. So I know Gary Habermas has done quite a bit in this area. Sean McDowell, has he done stuff in that too in recent years? You guys know?
I don't know.
I don't know. We had a guy on our show that is very convinced that the shroud is legitimate. I'm kind of agnostic on that. I don't think we need it as Christians to be evidential, but there are some people that really hold really tightly to it. But I don't think Sean's done anything on it.
Bill, have you experienced any hostility, any resentment on the part of atheists? How come you're double crossing us, and why? How come you're throwing us under the bus, and you're a traitor to your race? And
well, you do feel like you've betrayed them. Some of your people, especially Ken, who's very honest, who really has looked at everything. He's actually wrote a book, Why I Believed, and he just is such a deep thinker, like you, Phil. I mean, he thinks deeply on these things. And, we've had lots of discussions, which we agree on so much. But, I'm not Ken, I'm myself, and I have to make a decision, especially if you're part of the atheist Christian deal, then, you have to just look at the evidence. And that's where I came down on.
So does it seem to boil down to those two options? Like deism or just abstract theism or Christianity to you? Does it feel like those are the two battling options, or are there other religious explanations that you would consider?
Well, I play pickleball with Muslims, and what James and I are trying to do is reach out to people and find some common ground. So during Ramadan, I said, those poor Muslims, they're playing pickleball and they can't even drink water, not to mention food. So I said, I'm so sorry you guys can't drink water and you have to go through all this terrible stuff during Ramadan. He goes, oh, we look forward to it. And I went, what? I go, yeah. He goes, we like it. And I go, you like denying yourself and going through all this? So what I try to do is look at their perspective, even though I obviously disagree with them. Just try to better understand where they're coming from. Because again, I have all this Christian bias living in a Christian nation, kind of like a cultural Christian, like Dawkins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would think that there would be people that are still on the atheist side that would react to this recent development as you're weakening our case, you're weakening our credibility. And I think that in a certain sense, I think it does weaken the credibility of atheism when someone abandons atheism for theism and then can give you some actual rational reasons why they've done that. Because most of the time, well, I don't know about most of the time, but quite often I hear from atheists that Christianity is so irrational. No intelligent person would ever believe in this magic, this magician in the sky. And so it's the way that I see it, and I could be biased, and I think everybody probably knows that I am, but the way that I see it is that this does undermine the credibility of atheism when someone who is intelligent as you and who is well read as you and who has thought these things through to such an extensive degree can actually make this transition just because he feels overwhelmed by the evidence. Then that really seems to be a big blow to atheism every time that happens.
That could be the case. I think, but then you could say that the opposite would be true. Anytime a well-known Christian becomes an atheist, is that a blow to Christianity?
Well, it's interesting. Like, remember at Metroplex Atheist, that guy that died and you did his funeral? I forgot his name.
Yeah. Adikla.
He goes, I just kind of like hanging around these guys. And I'm thinking, why would you like hanging around these people? People think, when atheists get together, they talk about, I hate God and religion and deep. They talk about stupid stuff. I mean, just stuff I have no interest in, like computers and just,
Our book club is not a good sample size or a good way of choosing the samples, but we did a whole book club last year just when Bill said, I need to explain to people I'm struggling. And so we did a whole book club where Bill is having this existential crisis and he needs input, both from his Christian friends and his atheist friends. And I mean, we had a number of our authors, one of them, New York Times bestselling author, that came onto the book club that night, and none of them, to me, seemed to be judgmental or
John
dismissive.
Loftus was there, who had he had a huge impact. He wrote the book, The Christian Delusion, Why I Became an Atheist. He is a very, thoughtful, intelligent person, terrible debater, but, a really profound influence. Remember,
they were trying to give him, possible atheist solutions to his problem. Not that could be resolved just in 1 hour.
But Daniel and James was nice enough to put him up, take him to dinner. I mean, he couldn't have been any more nicer. And Daniel said, well, what do you think about these cosmological arguments? And Dan, from what Dan told me, it just blew right in. I don't know. I don't care. So a lot of times, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but some atheists become atheists for emotional reasons.
No.
I don't know. That's the rumor.
Tell me it isn't true. Yeah. No, that's actually a lot of what I wrote about in my book. But I don't. People can become Christians for emotional reasons.
Yeah, that's true.
And so we can adopt all sorts of ideologies just because we want to believe it. Sometimes people will adopt ideologies because they have wounds, and they're trying to deal with and trying to make sense of what wounded them. Yeah. And there are many Christians who will abandon Christianity because they've been wounded by Christians or been wounded by their fathers or by a family member or the loss of a loved one or whatever that it happens to be. And our jobs as apologists is to just encourage people to, no matter how hard it is, that you have to try to avoid making ideological decisions based on an emotional state that you might be in at this point. And I am concerned about Christians who become Christians because they've had some kind of an emotional experience. Because if an emotional experience can get you into Christianity, then an emotional experience can get you out of Christianity. And but what I appreciate about you, Bill, is that I don't think this transition has been based on emotions. I think it's been based on a lot of deliberative thinking on your part, and that's why I admire where you are and where you've come. And
I told him this at lunch today. If you look at, we would like to see him make that whole journey from atheism to Christianity, but to go from atheism to theism, if it's 1,000-mile journey, that's 999 miles he's already gone the 900. He's only got one more mile, or maybe just a couple of more blocks, I think, to get to where we would like to see him be. So we're trying to deal with that, and maybe we'll do a book club about it too or something. And so you don't have a whole lot of options. If there's a God, a personal God, as far as major religions, you have a couple of options maybe, but it begins to narrow down the possibility. Deism, you mentioned earlier, Phil, and we were talking about that at lunch. For some reason, it just doesn't seem to be robust enough of a worldview. It had a zenith back in the 18th, 17th, 18th century. Yeah. Some of our founding fathers were deists, but deism just hasn't seemed to survive as a valid worldview. You don't find that many deists. As Ken Daniels, one of our members, said in our book club, it seems to be a stopping point on your way going either direction. An atheist on their way to Christianity stops at deism for a while, or a Christian on his way to an atheist on his way to Christianity, same thing, may become a deist first and then a Christian. So I don't think that deism is a way of describing even now where Bill is. So he's definitely a theist. We just have to get down to that question. Okay, who is Jesus then?
Hey, help these guys get more subscribers, so God will, give me a better revelation here.
Yeah.
And guys, we're
Well, I
gonna have
think
to go here just a minute or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to wrap up here real quick, but before I did, I just wanted to share something very briefly. When I was in my late teens, I abandoned my Christianity because of the influence of atheist professors at University of Iowa when I was studying philosophy, and so I pretty much lost my faith, and I came back to it because my mother gave me a book by Francis Schaeffer that kind of helped bring me back into the fold. And whenever I shared that story, people would really talk to me about, well, I mean, I'm feeling like I'm struggling with my faith also, but I feel like I'm going to lose my reputation if I fall away, and I'm going to feel guilty and things like that. And what I've told them is, and I would say the same thing to you, Bill, is that it's better to have all of your dominoes knocked down than to have them standing up for the wrong reasons.
Oh, good
And
point.
and I will pray for you to come back to your faith, but the only way that I would like to see that happen is for you to come back to your faith for the right reasons. And you're a man of integrity, and you're a man of intellectual honesty. And if you do come back to your faith, I'm confident that it's not going to be for the wrong reasons. I think it's going to be for the right reasons. And so that's what we're praying for you. That's what we're praying for you for. But what I think of you and how I feel about you is not going to be influenced at all by whatever your future decisions might be. And so I admire you just the way you are. But I absolutely do celebrate this transition. So Josh,
thanks for all you contributed to the book club, Phil. And thanks, Josh, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us, sharing your story. It's kind of interesting to get someone in the middle of the journey, right? A lot of times we get somebody who has decided and is still an atheist or still a Christian, or somebody who has left and they've ended the journey of so it's fun to kind of see the experience of in the middle of the journey. So thank you for sharing that with us and being vulnerable with that, because that's a vulnerable place to be in, really, when it's like, well, I'm still in the journey, so I don't have all the answers of what I actually think yet. So I appreciate your candor in that regard. And as far as people watching, is there any place that they could follow James, Bill, where you guys are out there, Facebook, YouTube, that sort of thing?
If they want to be part of our monthly Zoom at the Atheist and Christian Book Club, you go to atheistchristianbookclub.com, and you can see about our next book club, and you're welcome to join that. And then more about Watchmen at best places, watchman.org.
Okay. All right. Thanks for sharing that with us. And for everybody watching, please like this video, share it. I think it's an important conversation to share. So please share it on either side of the spectrum. If you're an atheist, share it. If you're a Christian, share it. All those sorts of things, share it. Subscribe to Free Thinking Ministries. Subscribe to Phil Bear as well. And go to freethinkingministries.com. We've got all sorts of things there. We've got new articles coming out every single week. We've got opportunities to contact us. Tim and I are going to be doing a Q&A here soon, so we're excited for that as well. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. This was fun, and it was enlightening, and it was great to meet you. I met you as we were starting to live stream, so it was fun to meet you. Yeah,
and thank you, Bill, so much. Hopefully we can have a follow-up to this and we can continue.
Yeah, be great.
Great.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate you.